there's lots of messaging that would say you should diet. And we see diet as a 4-letter word. We would love to not have the world be a diet culture place.
Hi, I'm Diana Clark, and we are here today with Conversations with Intent. Today's guest is Dr. Ellen Rome, who is the head of the Center for Adolescent Medicine at the Cleveland Clinic and a professor of pediatrics at the medical school, if I'm correct?
Yes.
We're talking today about eating disorders, particularly as they emerge in adolescence. How common is this, Dr. Rome? And welcome.
Thank you for having me here. So eating disorders get diagnosed in 6 to 8% of all adolescents, but there's 60 to 80% of eating disorders that go undiagnosed and unrecognized. And that's true especially in disadvantaged populations where healthcare is hard to access. We also don't recognize them in our overweight and obese children also. I was at Boston Children's for fellowship for 3 years, and we saw a number of patients with eating disorders who taught us all so much. And when I got back to Cleveland, I really thought I was going to be an adolescent medicine reproductive health person doing lots of period stuff and sexually transmitted infections, et cetera. But when I was working half-time in my dad's practice, who was the best pediatrician I ever knew, and half-time at the Cleveland Clinic as their newly minted head of adolescent medicine, as a half-time person, because I was the only one in the city who was boarded in adolescent medicine at the time,
Right.
New boards,
Right.
back in 1994. I said, oh, I know how to do this. And the floodgates opened. And as those opened, we realized there's so much we need to be doing better. And all of us across the country who are involved in this work got together and we're doing a National Eating Disorders Quality Improvement Collaborative that's resulted in a lot of improvements in clinical care, a lot of research, a lot of advocacy for our patients. And as a part of that, we've been for many, many years the second largest site of that cohort. So we have quite the volume, and the Cleveland Clinic is designed to help improve quality and safety and care at all levels, supporting us to educate those who serve and to do the research that transforms care. So I was at the right place at the right time to really try to forward our knowledge and care. And we sure have the volume of patients who could use that support.
So I love the mission. I'm going to use that word. It sounds like the mission, forward care. Tell me a little bit about what the state of care was for eating disorders in 1990 and what it looks like now.
Well, in the late 80s, early 90s, the whole standard of care was, let's do a parentectomy, like an appendectomy. Let's carve parents out of the equation. And somewhere around the late 90s, early 2000s, or even mid 90s, that thought process started shifting so that people could say, if we do that, then parents and families are not woven into the solution. And that dooms kids to a lifetime of stressful family dinners or family vacations or family get-togethers, as opposed to empowerment of both parties to get the best out of each other and learn how to use each other for support. So that was a huge paradigm shift.
That is a huge, I like to say in the addiction world that if this is a family and somebody goes off and gets well in treatment, unless the other 4 people are doing the work of that hand to shift messaging, make it hospitable to come back in that family system, symptoms are going to reemerge. And I would imagine, and I'm asking, is that similar in eating disorder work as well?
We see that. So I'll give you a poignant example. One of my patients at age 19 had severe bulimia nervosa, and she was in a bike accident and had a concussion, was hospitalized in the ICU unconscious for 2 weeks. When she finally came to, everyone was asking her, well, do you feel like you need to throw up? And she thought it was about head trauma. She's like, no, I'm fine. I don't need to throw up. I don't even have any nausea. My head hurts a little bit. And she finally was told when she was awake enough, that's because you had bulimia. And it took her about 9 months of living at home. And she came back in follow-up and said, okay, I understand why I was using that and how I was using that as a coping strategy. I'm ready for some different strategies.
I love the way you're framing that, Dr. Rome, that it was a strategy of coping. We look at it as something that is just maladaptive. How can an eating disorder, let's talk back a little bit, how can an eating disorder be seen as a coping strategy?
So they're biopsychosocial illnesses. That means they're brain and body. And they've got this huge genetic component.
Load.
So it's not a family's fault unless they want to blame their own gene pool. And that's not fair.
Everybody has something.
Yeah. Exactly. And so when we're talking about coping strategies, if one kid is super stressed, they may start getting high every day. Another kid may start binge eating. Another kid may start restricting. Throw in other external factors, such as a dieting culture, where they're bombarded with messaging on all fronts on what's healthy, what's not healthy, and negative body imaging that can come from home, from peers, from school, from the health class, showing them something that their frontal cortex isn't developed enough to process accurately, or just good old-fashioned, TikTok and YouTube and social media, TV. And there's lots of messaging that would say you should diet. And we see diet as a 4-letter word.
Oh, really?
So we would love to not have the world be a diet culture place.
Why is diet a 4-letter word?
Most people will demonize the other half. This is healthy, this is unhealthy. And we want people to have balance. So for instance, when we're talking about exercise, there's too much of a good thing. We have people that have relative energy deficiency syndrome of sport, where here's their energy intake, here's what they're burning off, and they're running in deficit spending. They need this much in to support the 20 hours a week that they're doing. We have other kids where they might eat, but then if they don't run their 7 miles that day, they're totally stressed. So compulsive exercise as a means of purging calories. So there's all sorts of variations on what disordered eating can mean. And when we think of this is all good and this is all bad, it tends to not help people find their balance. We also have a world where people are very, very, very busy, and family dinners, or moms and dad are working 3 shifts and aren't there for family dinner. So there's so many reasons that family dinner doesn't happen. And that's a time to connect and to create and role model healthy habits.
And what would a healthy dinner look like? I'm literally asking that simple question. I know I grew up with that, but I wonder how many people who don't sit down to dinner even have an understanding of what would a healthy dinner, how long is it? How many, dishes? What would be a good dinner?
So it's sitting down time where the personal enslavement devices are not present or are face down or are not buzzing, so that everyone is present. And my kids got very adept at this. If you don't want to answer questions, go ahead on the offensive and start asking. So my daughter, when she had a really long day, would be like, "Mom, how was your day? Tell me what was the most interesting thing." For them.
What good social skill building. It is the perfect evasion tactic in social grace. I love it.
It was awesome. And then same way, you could discuss, kids are early. You can say, what are you grateful for today? You can use little table topics if you can't think of them or find them online. You can figure out what did you hear about school about X, Y, or Z today? This is what happened at work that was so frustrating, and this is what I did with it. So you can get a chance to role model problem solving and generating, and it's okay to not have all the answers, or to have your kid not all the answers yet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you're generating growth mindset with family dinners, ideally.
Right. If you're saying, wow, that sounds hard, and you do hard things, that's a different message than, nothing is hard.
Yeah. And wellness messaging. There was a book that came out in the 90s. I think his name was Orville Hendricks, and he wrote a book, Getting the Love You Want.
Yes, I remember that.
It's kind of like coaching in that if you're putting up a mirror, if your 2-year-old or 4-year-old said, I just jumped out of a window. If you say, you did what? And you get really worried because of safety, then it deflates the kid. But if you say, you just jumped out of a window, and the kid says, yes, in my imaginary house,
right.
I just jumped out of the window and I flew 10 feet. So if you match the emotion, you can actually build and then learn more. And if you mirror back what they said with, they get that you heard them and understand, so you're present, you're engaged, and then they can actually keep sharing what they actually mean and tell you more and discover more themselves.
I love that. So I'm thinking about that adolescent person who's getting care for an eating disorder, and they're sitting at the dinner table. How do families in a healthy way respond to that? And how do families that are under stress about that tend to respond?
Think about yourself. When your worry level is super high, your emotions are high, and it gets everybody a little more anxious. So when you're anxious, are they going to eat anything? What are they going to eat? It's kind of like when a doctor asks, does it hurt when I press here? Okay, well, maybe it does hurt when you press there. And so if you can, instead of focusing on the food and the weighty talk, and I'll talk about what that is in a second.
Yeah, I want to hear it.
Talking of, just playing Uno, like doing a game, talking about the daily events while the work of eating happens for the kid who's struggling eating. And then another key thing for families is to separate their kid from the eating disorder. And the first person I heard do this was Brave Girl Eating, Harriet Brown, who in the book, I'm not sure what her daughter's real name is, but in the book, her daughter was Kitty. And when the eating disorder showed, they would call it Not Kitty. So Not Kitty was at dinner tonight. So I've got 2 patients' favorite names, and I'll tell my other patients these, and they're allowed to borrow or create their own. But they're kind of fun and obvious examples. So one patient named her eating disorder Voldemort.
I love that.
And she used to love cake. And when she was able to go back to college, nutritionally restored and healthy enough to be there, her parents got her a cake that said "F you Voldemort" on it.
I love it.
And she sent me a picture, ready to eat her cake.
Great. That's great.
It was very easy for every Harry Potter fan to figure out, okay, Voldemort's the enemy. This, we don't want to, naming the eating disorder Voldemort separates it. My other favorite was a 9-year-old who named her eating disorder Fred. And I asked, Fred, what does that mean? She, without missing a beat, said, freaking ridiculous eating disorder.
At 9. Yeah. That's great. Yeah.
And so if you name it something like that, the parent can say, nope, Fred's not invited to dinner. We want you, Kitty,
Sally.
At dinner.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so helping them externalize that eating disorder is a step forward towards doing that exorcism where you're divorcing the eating disorder from yourself. For the 7th, 8th graders, 6th graders, I can say, okay, think of it like a mean girl in your head. And if they're having a hard time imagining that, I'll say, okay, do you have a best friend? And if they do, then I say, all right, describe your best friend. And almost always they'll say how funny they are, or loyal, or they're really good in a crisis, or whatever it is. And I'll say, the things that are most important to you, tell me nothing about how that person looks. We want your inner dialogue to be equally generous and kind to yourself, so we can retrain you how to be your own best friend too. So that when that eating disorder voice, your Fred or Voldemort or whatever you want to call it, starts doing mean girl stuff in your head, you can elbow it out and say, nope, I don't have to listen to this.
So I'm sitting at the table, I'm imagining a scene. I'm sitting at the dinner table and I'm watching one of my teenagers really push around food. And I've been watching this for a couple of weeks and I'm noticing a real shift, a shift in sleep, a shift in attention span. I'm noticing after a few weeks these sorts of symptoms. What would I do? What do I do then?
So, it's fair game to say, I'm noticing you're underfueling your body.
Ooh, that's good.
You're not, and we want to avoid the knots. Your body needs more energy or fuel than you're providing it with at this time. So you're trying to phrase it to strength-based techniques instead of pointing out you're doing this wrong. And instead of going to good foods versus bad foods, healthy versus unhealthy, if you can go with an all foods fit philosophy and figure out what balance looks like for your family, because it may be that somebody has celiac disease, dad had a heart attack and needs to be on a low cholesterol. The kids' brains need certain things all the way through age 26. And if you want easy peasy for most tweens and teens and young adults, it's 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, go. 6 cups of fluids a day. Maybe a little less if they're, it's less if they're 4 or 5 or 6. 5 a day fruits and veggies. Every school age kid knows that one. 4 calcium things a day for teens. So
really?
Tweens and teens, yes, because they need to develop bone.
Wow.
3 meals with 3 food groups, protein, fat, carb.
So that's at dinner. That dinner should have those food groups, right?
So should breakfast, so should lunch. So
Wow.
3 meals with 3 food groups, protein, fat, carb. And that means, with a toddler or a little kid, you can say, I want 3 colors on your plate. By the time they're school age, you can say, all right, we need, where's the protein? Where's the fat? Where's the carb? So if a kid likes avocado toast, throw egg or feta on it. And it's got all 3 food groups.
Right.
And then, so that's 3 food groups, 3 meals a day. 2 is 2 snacks with 2 food groups. So peanut butter crackers or hummus and pita or hummus and carrots or, so there's all these things that families are labeling good foods that still can be good foods. But if the kids' thing is ice cream, it's fair game to say, well, ice cream's kind of a perfect food because it's protein, fat, carb, and calcium in a dosable package.
Right.
So for the binger, you don't want them to eat the gallon, but you can say, all right, it's fair game to have your ice cream bar twice a day as your snack if you have somebody where they need more energy and more calcium anyway. And then 1 is for brain. 1 is an hour before bed, put your screens away and turn them off and so that your brain can actually sleep. And then 0 is 0 missed meals. So 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, go. Is kind of an easy way to think through basics. And we'll have a lot of family that are doing keto, which may or may not be appropriate for a growing body. The kid may very well need the carbs, especially if they're trying to do sports. So when you have a family that somebody in the family goes vegetarian or vegan, that's an opportunity to build your multidisciplinary team. Besides your pediatrician, it's worthwhile seeing a dietitian versed in eating disorders so that you can help them be a healthy vegetarian. If they watched some special and decided that they're decreasing their carbon footprint or ethically don't want to eat animals or whatever it is, there's ways to do that in a healthy way. It revolves around early intervention and education so they're not completely cutting out a food group without realizing it or demonizing a food group.
Or narrowly focusing on eating only one food group because that seems safe or
correct,
good.
Right. So tweens, teens, and young adults need all the way through age 26, 50 to 90 grams of fat a day. Our brains are already myelinated or wrapped in nerves are wrapped in myelin, which is the fatty sheath. So that's why you're not supposed to be able to teach an old dog new tricks. But with kids, they're still developing those neural pathways. And
But
so
what
they
if we
gave
continue eating those fatty foods? Do
well,
we get more myelin?
out of my age range of research focus, though, we certainly have seen adults learn new tricks and we've learned more. So, for instance, we used to think that you got all the bone you were going to get by age 15. Then we found out that women and girls were putting down bone all the way through 29. Then we had Jerry Linenger, who was on Mirror in space for 6 months, middle-aged, 40-year-old white male, lost 30% of his bone, came back to Earth, and with NASA and an exercise physiologist and a dietitian and sports physiologist, he gained 100% of his bone back. So if he can do that, so can the rest of us. It shouldn't be all done by a certain age. So same way, brain, there's probably more plasticity than we're aware of. And we certainly want to maximize it in our young people, just like we want to put all the bone we can in their bone banks.
How do we support somebody to, you have this 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, blast off. But I would imagine that what we're hoping for is sort of that they can listen to a body that tells them what they need. Is that true or no? Is intuitive eating a thing, or is that old science?
Well, for some people, it really helps, and not for everybody. So not everybody is wired to feel and experience hungry and full. We have a lot of people that train themselves out of hunger. So for instance, if you live in a war zone or in a food desert, you may not be able to respond to hunger appropriately. And same way, we have a lot of people that forget what full feels like, or that may be biologically or genetically missing a neuroreceptor that tells them, I'm full. So that works for some, but not all. And the other one is binge eating is the most common eating disorder. If we can get people to delay 10 minutes from a binge and do something else, sometimes that's enough to break that cycle.
Is that right? So if you have an impulse to go eat, if you delay it, okay, I can go eat in 15 minutes, just not right now. That's a helpful strategy.
Well, it's also if you're in a cycle where, yes, to answer your question, yes, that can help. In addition, if you're eating your regular meals, your brain is not turned on saying, eat more. So if you think about, 1 is, I am so hungry I could eat an elephant. And 10 is, I just ate an elephant. If you can get people living in a 3 to 7 and starting to figure out what that feels like, eventually with regular meals where they're eating every so many hours, it gets to be recognizable. Oh, I'm at a 3. I'm due for my snack. Oh, I'm at a 7. I guess I don't need 3 extra pieces of cake.
This sounds so counterculture in a fast-paced world. This idea that we're going to pay attention to our physical needs seems counterculture right now. Pretty revolutionary to pay attention to our bodies and not just the outside or the energy.
And yet so very basic. Attending to sleep as well. For instance, when you're sleep deprived, guess what? You eat more.
I didn't know that.
And we see it, for instance, people with obstructive sleep apnea and daytime sleepiness, their weight tends to go up because their appetite goes up as well. It's one of the body's strategies for self-regulation.
And are certain kinds of foods craved when we're tired, or is it just hunger in general?
It depends on the person. Yeah, it depends on the person.
Got it. Okay.
And when I mentioned the weighty talk, I just want to go back to that for one moment because it's so very prevalent. We hear it all the time, like, oh, I'm so fat. Do I look fat in this? Or judgy comments about the person on TV or in the next room. And families and society does so much of this. In fact, in the 90s, Diane Newmark Steiner, one of our colleagues in adolescent medicine, wrote a book that was called I'm Like So Fat. And she talked about a lot of the data from Project EAT, which was a very big, large evidence-based study on that gave us a lot of data about weighty talk and about how even well-intended comments can be perceived as hurtful by a child or an adolescent or an adult. And that parent weight talk about themselves is associated with higher rates of weight gain in their kids and maladaptive eating behaviors in young people around them. We also know that fat shaming as a strategy correlates with more dieting behavior and also with obesity, which gets back to diet as a four-letter word.
Right. Diet, shame, right?
Diet
Weighty.
culture, all of those are
Diet
negative.
culture.
We want joy with exercise, not compulsion. We want
Joy with food.
joy with food. Exactly.
Yeah.
And
It
ideally
seems
joy
to-
with family dinners or family breakfast or, whenever family can and food go together.
Right. So, what gives you hope? We've come this far. What is giving you hope in the future for the treatment of eating disorders?
My patients and their families give me hope every day. We're all seeing success stories, and the ones whose courage and tenacity is just so visible. I have one patient who had her multidisciplinary team, adolescent medicine, dietitian, and a very skilled therapist, and two amazing parents in partnership who helped this kid transform from, as a 12, 13-year-old post-pubertal kid, a crumpled ball on their lap, to being the lead in the local high school musical and ready to head off to college in wellness and health. And I see her superpowers and kids and families' superpowers every day at play. So that always gives me hope.
Is there certain science? Is there certain science that we're finding that is also hopeful?
Yes. As we learn more on the genetics front, we can do more targeted therapies. And remember, psychotherapy, the brain part, skills building is one piece. There's also pharmacology, what medicines we use. That's another small piece, not an end all or a be all. But we can target the biology better with meds as we learn more. So we're not there yet. We need a Star Trek scanner.
I know, right?
Tell us which med. Same thing for attention deficit disorder. We're getting better and better at which meds are going to work for which person. But for many, many years, it was let's roll the dice and see which one works best. So that's an area for hope. We're learning more about that. We're learning more about brain. So for instance, there was a great study where they did PET flow scans on brain and found that if you set a bunch of normal, healthy people, normal's all relative, and a bunch of people with anorexia nervosa and did the scan and showed them while they're in the scan images of a fire and a chocolate cake, the healthy controls would have their limbic system light up on the fire, like danger, danger, Will Robinson, be worried about this. And their frontal cortex would light up for the chocolate cake and it wouldn't trigger intense emotion. And with anorexia nervosa, it was flip-flopped. So the chocolate cake was like, danger, danger. And the fire was like, okay, this is, and they could get themselves out of the fire, So we know that there are brain changes that happen when the brain is starved. And we're learning more about how do we work towards reversing that.
Reversing that.
We're also learning more about how do you engage the family. So FBT, family-based treatment, wasn't a thing back when. And now we're using that with great success. And we can shorten how long somebody needs to be in the hospital for acute medical stabilization and still do okay at home. So there's all sorts of things that are going on medically. The other one is that National Eating Disorders Quality Improvement Collaborative. In 2008 to 2010, we were pooling our data, and there was at the time only 8 centers. Now it's about 26 working together, partnering on this. And we found that there was a set of patients with restrictive eating whose physiology was identical to anorexia nervosa, but their mindset had none of that. And we presented that in 2010 to the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual 5th edition revision team, and thinking they'd put it in DSM-6. DSM-6 is not out yet. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, in 2013, we gave birth to this diagnosis in DSM-5 of ARFID, or avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. So for over a decade now, we've been studying ARFID and how do we do better at helping kids with that. So for instance, we discovered they fall into kind of three buckets. There's the kids who are picky eaters, and they may be with autism or not, but they may only eat three things or whatever else it is. There's the kids who get COVID or mono or something and lose interest in food and never regain it. And then there's the kids who are avoidant or aversive. So for instance, the kid with Crohn's disease who expects food to hurt. Their Crohn's is in remission, but they're still expecting food to hurt. So it's a charged thing. Or the 8-year-old who chokes on a Starburst and never wants to choke again. Or the kid who gets a vomiting illness and never wants to throw up again. So these are kids who are avoiding food for different reasons, and it can become incredibly dysfunctional for the kid and the families and for the growth.
And yet the origin story is very different for each one of those. So it sounds like the origin of the behavior is as important as modifying what they do.
Then if you keep the brain starved enough, anorexia nervosa can follow. We're also getting better at recognizing eating disorders in people of all sizes and shapes. So for instance, atypical anorexia, you may be in a larger body, one that's categorized as overweight or obese, and still be in severely as medical deep doo-doo as the person with anorexia nervosa who's visibly underweight.
It's much more complicated than I think we as the public seem to indicate and I love this idea that we can bring it back into families quicker, safer.
We want families and clinicians to pay attention to growth curves. So if your kid has been growing along this percentile, 50th percentile all their life, and for height and 60th for weight, and then all of a sudden they go like this and cross a percentile, that means take it to the PD or go up 4 percentiles, like from the 50th to 75th to the 90th. Either direction for height or weight means trust your parent gut and go to your pediatrician or your clinic, family practice doc and say, I'm noticing this. Can we look at this further? And if a family feels blown off by the clinician, go ahead and trust your instinct and seek care with an adolescent medicine doc or somebody versed in the care of eating disorders, because prevention is so much easier than the pounds required for cure.
I'm pausing at that because I think that's a great way to end our podcast today. For our audience, I hope you've enjoyed this episode with Dr. Ellen Rome as much as I have. I've learned a ton about eating disorders and messaging, and I really thank you for joining us today.
I'm so grateful for being here, and I hope everyone gets a chance to learn more, do more, see more, and share.
This has been Conversations with Intent. I hope you'd enjoyed this episode with Dr. Ellen Rome as much as I did. And if you liked it, please like us, subscribe, send it to your friends, give it to your mother on any of the common platforms of choice. You can also reach us at conversations@intentclinical.com. Thank you.